Hello and welcome. Can we just take a moment to acknowledge the fantastic volunteers they have here at NCECA? Can we give them a round of applause? I've been working with them the last couple days and they are phenomenal. So I'm just really thankful for them. My name is Erin Young, and I'm the director of the Clay Studio at StarWorks in Star, North Carolina. Yeah, that's right, we know about StarWorks. It's located about 10 miles from Seagrove. A year before taking on that position at StarWorks, I met our speaker, Kate Johnston, during a residency at the North Carolina Pottery Center in Seagrove. Kate was working in Seagrove for about 4 years at that point. She was a recent graduate of Alfred University, and she's a strong maker of wood-fired utilitarian wares and large jars. We became instant friends because we were both eagerly finding our way in our careers. And full disclosure, Seagrove is a small town. It's a population of about 230, so there weren't a lot of young women ceramic artists to hang out with, but I mean, that's not the only reason, I promise. But actually, in a very short time, that's changing, and it has a lot to do with Kate and other women like her. She is helping to push the status quo and broaden the norm so that other artists looking to be a part of this wonderful ceramic tradition can find a foothold. I admire her. I am incredibly grateful to her, and I'm so honored to introduce this fabulous artist and dear friend. Let's turn it over to her. Let's welcome Kate Johnston as she shares her talk on directing dialogue.
Thanks, Erin. Hey, everyone. Thanks for being here and having me. I'm Kate Johnston, and I've been a potter in Seagrove, North Carolina for 9 years now. I'm married to Daniel Johnston, and this is our studio. We make our work separately, but we fire together currently, and we occasionally show together. We have a 850 cubic foot wood kiln, and this is our current kiln right before its first firing in 2013. A kiln of this scale allows for large work to be made in a volume and a seemingly infinite number of small pots. We use 5 cords of wood in each firing. There's still old sawmills in North Carolina which produce cut-off slabs, and those are considered waste, which we purchase. We cut them into 4-foot length and stack them for drying to fire with. We fire for about 6 days, depending on the weather and the type of work in the kiln, and we end in a crash cool, which is what you're seeing here. In order for this massive volume of pots to be made, love this picture, get all the wood stacked and have such a large kiln brought to temperature, we have to have help. And Daniel has established a long-term paid apprenticeship system where people come for 2 to 3 years. They learn our business, but more importantly, they learn our approach to making pots and to firing. And these are the amazing apprentices that have helped us. John Vigland is now the CFO of East Fork, starting in the top corner. Bill Jones in the middle has a studio in Greensboro, North Carolina. And Andrew Dutcher is the combustion and electrical technician at Wet Dog. The bottom row here are our current apprentices. Natalie Novak, Charlie Hayes, and Jacob Craig are with us in the studio now. They're actually firing the kiln right now. The master-apprentice relationship can be a challenging one for both parties because the work's hard, the hours are long, but ultimately the needs of both parties have to be met for it to be positive. And some of those needs for an apprentice are financial. They have student loans and car payments just like everyone else. So a question we're asked a lot is, how can a rural pottery support 5 people? A primary way we sell pots is through kiln openings, and these openings are a traditional way of reaching customers in the Seagrove area. It's a convention that's been kept alive through generations of potters there. These are kiln opening cards, one from our studio as well as Mark Hewitt and David Stumpfley. And we find the physical cards are more effective than email invitations. And the cards have become collectible objects themselves. And this makes the mailing list and the constant addition of new customers a vital part of the business. Our kiln openings are done as a group with work made by myself, Daniel, and the apprentices. Now, historically, people would show up the day a kiln was unloaded to purchase the pots. But now, and this is true of the whole town, we convert the studio into a gallery space and we fill it with pots that are cleaned and priced. This is Charlie cleaning pots. But what separates it from a gallery show or a home sale, which I know is something that's done in the north. This work is usually a single kiln load, and all levels of quality are represented, and it can be thought of as a singular body of work because it's been made all at the same time in the same space. And this makes kiln openings a potent form of customer education. It brings the public into the world of the potter. The studio is an intimate setting where makers spend the majority of their time. And by inviting the public into our space, it creates deeper understanding of the work and the process. Customers can see the raw clay piles around our studio, grasp the clay processing because the equipment is in front of them. They can see the wheels and the drying racks, and they can even walk into the kiln. And when customers get to see the birthplace of the objects they're purchasing, they become invested in the making process as well. The pot transcends this objectness and becomes a symbol of their experience in the studio and their newly discovered knowledge of clay and its processes. Of course, the kiln opening has its drawbacks. It's a limiting model because it relies upon customers who are willing to drive to the studio. So excitement has to surround the pots before selling can support us this way. And so for my own work, I generate that excitement through social media. And social media is a broad term, of course. I use Instagram. And in this talk, I'll be using Instagram as the media example. But I think this approach, it applies to all image-based sharing sites. And these platforms, of course, are used by non-artists to keep in contact with people they already know. But as artists and makers, we need to use it to forge new connections. My Instagram feed is not intended for people who know me. I curate it for other makers, students, customers, arts administration people, really anyone who might be interested in my studio or my process and could help further my career. So if you're using Instagram or any other social media site, you may be using an analytics app to better understand your followers and your success within this. But I encourage you to create your own self-analysis as well. So I believe a successful account has an awareness of purpose and also gives genuine insight into the person, the studio, and the business behind it. So I did this breakdown of my Instagram account, and out of the 325 images that I've posted to Instagram, 42% are process. So that really gives you an understanding of what I'm interested in and what I want to share with people. 16% are nature and wildlife. Of course, that's what's going on the surface of my pots. 14% are show promotion, 11 finished work. I'm not so interested in finished work, right? I like making. 8% is the firing process. 4% are process videos because I don't enjoy making those. 3% are experimental work, 2% are drawings, and 2% are personal life. So notice there's not a bathroom selfie category, right? There's not what I ate for lunch. I'm in love with wet clay, and particularly leather hard clay, and that's evident from these images. And even though my approach is fully from a professional perspective, it's still a genuine glimpse into my studio and my process, and therefore what I care about. So I've been actively posting since May 15th, 2014, which as of February 13th, when I wrote this part of the talk, was 1,736 days on Instagram. I had 325 posts, so I posted about every 5.5 days. I had 11,634 followers, meaning I reach about 6.5 people a day for 5 years. So I don't see 6 people in a normal day. I'm in a small studio, I see 4 people, the same 4 people every day. So having a strong and consistent social media presence has allowed me to live in an isolated rural setting and still reach a global audience. And while it's raised awareness in my direct area and resulted in better kiln opening sales for sure, it's also broadened my ceramic connections. So it's led to teaching workshops, having profitable online sales, getting invitations to gallery shows, and also international symposiums. And all of those things supplement the direct studio income. So I'd like to take a step back and talk about how I learned the real power of this virtual connection. And also how I've used social media marketing to direct the dialogue around my work. So I started making pots, large pots, when I was about 17, which is well before I met my husband. But if you're aware of what my husband is doing, Daniel's really well known for those large pots. And we were having this really awkward problem where customers thought that he was making the forms and I was just decorating the surfaces. And we'll talk about that more later. But the point is, I could get people to picture this very clearly, but not this. There we go. So of course there's historical precedent for that division of labor. The man makes the pot, the woman decorates it. But that's not true in our studio. It's not accurate, and we don't collaborate in this way. We actually agreed not to. So Daniel and I discussed it, and we decided that this was a marketing problem created by our culture. Also, it's not the customer's fault if they don't understand what you do. It's your job to educate them. And so we decided that a time-lapse video could solve this when it was put on social media. So I made this time-lapse. The video shows the entire process of a large pot, which is 3 days in this case, and it should be condensed into 1 minute if it plays correctly. But most importantly, the video shows undeniably that the process of making is done exclusively by myself. So it's a visual statement that can't be denied. If a person is confronted with this video and still questions my authorship, they're faced with their own prejudice. This documentation is direct, but it's not combative. A person who never imagined a small woman can do this doesn't feel personally attacked. So when making this video, I was trying to answer the question, how can I change a person's mind? I'd argued with enough customers to know that arguing doesn't work. Saying, yes, I made this wasn't convincing enough, and going further and shaming them for their disbelief doesn't result in sales. So once I posted this, it did go viral. I didn't do anything to make that happen. I didn't pay to promote it. Actually, I posted it and I went to the laundromat. From my own page, it got 3.7 million views. It was picked up by Mother Earth News, C-File, and a Spanish language news site. So the tally altogether was about 10 million within the week. And so this video, when it was released first on Facebook and then Instagram, really changed the course of my career and taught me how to use this medium. So I was interviewed shortly after this was released and asked, what made you think you could make large work? Yeah. And I didn't have a good answer. I didn't have an answer at the time, and the question really bothered me because it came from inside the ceramic community. And the ignorance of customers can be excused, but we have a bigger challenge within the pottery community, and I think the answer is also educational in nature. We're still going here. I'm going to let it finish. There it goes. There it is. So this is the piece right before firing and a piece that was in that same firing next to it. So after I got that question, I thought back and tried to figure out where the idea of large work came into my consciousness. Here I am, a very embarrassed 14-year-old, shortly after talking my way into a studio assistantship in New Jersey. And the place is Wheaton Arts and Cultural Center, and the pottery studio there is run by an amazing man, Terry Plaskett. It's still open, you can go see him. Terry was friends with Toshiko Takaezu, and she would come to the studio once a year, sometimes bring us pots to fire. And at this impressionable young age, I was exposed to a female maker of monumental vessels. And it became a goal of mine at that point, I think. And because of Toshiko, I never saw my size or my gender as an obstacle. And this isn't to say I didn't have doubts, but those doubts they centered on learning skills, understanding the material, getting access to kilns and equipment. This image was taken 8 years after I met Toshiko for the first time. At this point, I had 4 years in a production studio, followed by 4 years of amazing support from the faculty at Alfred University. So 2 days after this image was taken, I moved from New York to central North Carolina, to Seagrove, and enveloped myself in a town full of deep ceramic history and a thriving big pot culture. In the top corner, Mark Hewitt is a former Cardue apprentice, and he brought the massive wood kilns to the southern US. And he produced an outstanding lineage of his own. In the center top is my husband, Daniel Johnston. Below him, Matt Jones. The bottom left is Joseph Sand. All three of them apprenticed for Mark. David Stumfley is in the bottom right. He studied Ongi with Mr. O in Korea, and Ben Owen in the top corner is a multi-generational potter from Seagrove. This is just a sample of the big pot makers in North Carolina, and these amazing men welcomed me into the group. They invited me to shows, and they introduced me to collectors. They made room for me in a way that was unexpected. When I was asked that question, what made you think you could make large work? This is what that person was picturing. They saw that I didn't fit. And this person that asked that question also understood that all of these remarkable men came from overwhelmingly male traditions. So I think this issue of who is taught what skills is the reason I find myself in what feels like an entirely male subset of our profession in North Carolina, which is large-scale wood firers. This didn't bother me at first. The studio in New Jersey was mostly male at the time. That's no longer true. But I've built kilns with men. I've fired kilns on all-male crews. They've been my teachers, my friends, my colleagues. And I didn't overly concern myself with this issue of male space. I accepted the occasional and usually unintentional sexist slight as part of reality of being female in this place and in this profession. And that is until I met the indomitable Erin Young. Erin was the second ceramic resident at StarWorks, a program she now runs. There was room in our apprentice cabin, and she moved in, and while she didn't work at our pottery, she changed the dynamic in an unforeseen way. The addition of another woman made me realize how my own identity had been suppressed by the lack of understanding. So when there's only one female in a group, her voice can be drowned out. But another woman can offer support for the female perspective. And so the first slide is the first firing Erin did with us, and the second slide is what I think of as the gender-neutral firing. It was our first firing with as many women as men at our studio, and Natalie Novak is in that image, and she's an apprentice now. I think this was during her trial period. Of course, there are actually other women makers in North Carolina who make large work and who wood fire. Donna Craven, on the end, comes from a historic potting family in Seagrove, and she was the only female big pot maker in town when I moved there. The few customers who accepted me did so because they knew Donna. She had made space. Bandana Pottery in the middle here, it's an amazing wood fire studio in western North Carolina run by Naomi Daglesh and Michael Hunt. They actively take on female apprentices and are adding new women to our community. And these are the people that I've looked to when the question of gender has been placed against large-scale work or wood firing. And also the people I've looked to when I've questioned my own belonging in that space. So in our studio now, Daniel's making very large installations, and the apprentices are part of that manufacturing process. They're working on such a large scale that the strength of any individual is not enough to lift or load pieces, so it's become an engineering feat. We've pushed the design of pottery wheels, glazing troughs, and kilns, and in the face of this work, Charlie and Natalie have become beautifully equal. The obstacle is no longer physical strength, but equipment and design and innovation. I interviewed with the late John Glick. Some of you might have known him for a space in his studio when I was leaving school. It's a position I didn't take. But at one point in the interview, he asked me about my physical size, and my heart sank. I mean, I just knew that this would be the moment he would decide I wouldn't be useful. And I think he could hear that in my voice when I told him I was 5 feet tall. His response completely changed my perspective on the whole issue, though. He said, well, I'm tall and we'll have to do things together, but it's not a problem, we'll build you a ramp. This statement shifted my whole perspective. My size is not a deficit. We can acknowledge physical differences and address them through the design of our studios and our equipment. So most people would picture a wood firing apprenticeship to look like this, but of course it doesn't have to. This is Margaret Larson, who interned for us over the summer, and Sarah Matez firing a kiln at Bandana Pottery. And going back to the impact of social media, putting images like this out into the pottery community normalizes the inclusion and the mentorship of women within wood firing studios. And while sometimes I feel like I'm flooding my Instagram page with big pots and kilns and flame, I'm doing it with the goal of educating my community and my customers. Because there's a group coming up behind me, and I want there to be room in the imagination of their collectors and peers for what they make. So I interviewed several of them, several women, all former apprentices who were in a studio that was wood firing and making large work, and their perspectives helped me shape this talk. Sarah Matez recently finished her apprenticeship at Bandana Pottery and is now a resident at Starworks. When we talked, she brought up wood kilns as an overtly male space and the difficulty of being heard during firings. And one thing she said I found really interesting, that when a firing team is aware of her apprenticeship at Bandana, because Bandana Pottery is so well respected, they're more likely to take her opinion seriously. Amanda Holloman Cook was the first apprentice at East Fork and is now the production manager. This is what she had to say about applying for an apprenticeship. Quote, "When I started looking into apprenticeships, I was given many, many warnings from peers. Mainly, they would note the intimidating atmosphere of a male-dominated space and the fact that several people offering apprenticeships at that time either had not or would not accept women." She goes on to say that in contrast, her reality was very positive at East Fork, and as an apprentice there, she always felt supported and heard. Julie Elkins is recently finished her apprenticeship for Seagrove potter Sid Luck and is now a resident at the North Carolina Pottery Center. Julie and I discussed lots of things, but among them the average male as the standard. So the standard for the weight of construction materials, for tools, the size of safety equipment. And these are all obstacles for women when we do push to participate. So if we accept that men are the standard, women can be made lesser. In a world built by men and for men, women are excluded. Natalie Novak was so busy making giant columns, we didn't have an interview. But we do have an ongoing dialogue. She's been researching the other mostly untalked about women who are within the Cardew lineage to better understand their contribution and how she fits within it. And this leads into Steve Compton, who is a North Carolina historian. And he acknowledged the under-recognized role of women potters and what they've done throughout the state. So Donna Craven was on the first cover, the first edition of Potteries Through Time, and I'm on the second edition. So Stephen has taken the same tactic of infiltrating the public's consciousness through imagery and emphasizing the participation of women potters as a way to normalize our existence. So everyone in this room has power of some kind. If you're a student, you can show your work so that others who are learning know their community. If you're an educator, you can create a safe, accessible learning space. If you're a collector, actively seek out and support underrepresented makers. If you're an equipment manufacturer, design for the average human instead of the average man. Every interaction has an opportunity for education, and bringing customers into the studio space, like for kiln openings, gives them a physical sense of the making process. Social media platforms show people what you do, what you care about, and where you place value. So this kind of really small personal business is about building connections, whether it's physically bringing a person into the studio or broadening someone's world through a screen. That's my talk, everyone. Thank you. We have just a few minutes if there are any questions. We do have a microphone here. Aaron has agreed to run it to people so you don't have to come down.
How long did it take you to create an impacting following on Instagram?
That's a difficult question. I don't know that I have yet. Yeah. I think it took probably 3 years before I was proud of a number on Instagram, before it kind of pushed out of the 200 likes from friends and family, right? And I started being reached by people who I didn't have any direct connection to. So it took a while.
Follow-up question then.
Yeah.
When you have your kiln opening sales,
Yeah.
It's just one kiln, correct? Do you mix other pots with that, or is it exclusively from that kiln load? And then secondly, do you typically sell out?
It's almost exclusively from that single kiln load. There are occasionally other pots, but you saw how big that kiln is? Mm-hmm. We fire about 5 times a year. So after a kiln opening, then the rest of the pots get disseminated to other places, to galleries, or they go to shows. So usually all the pots are gone by the time we fire a kiln again. I wouldn't say we sell out necessarily. I mean, we do have good shows, but if we think there's a danger of that, we'll hold pots back, right? Because there's always commitments. There's commitments to craft fairs, and there's commitments to gallery shows.
Other than Instagram and postcards, what other methods do you use to advertise or broadcast your kiln openings?
That's really it. Yeah, no, I talk to people. If I'm out at a show, I'll have the postcards with me. I'll tell people all about it. And I am part of the Seagrove Area Potters Association. And as a group, we put on things together and use NPR to promote. But that's not something we do personally for our kiln openings. We do one kiln opening a year as a group, which is the last weekend in April usually. And so the whole town promotes that together. But having a mass of people be able to funnel into that promotion really helps everyone. Thanks for coming.